were you able to translate this ID into a complete data object from that restaurant's JSON file? In the end, what we gotta do is we have to read that JSON file, as we do it in other routes as well, and then we have to search for one specific restaurant by ID. And we can do that so that we find a restaurant with that ID. And therefore, I'll start by reading that file. For this, we can again copy that code, which we use in other routes as well, copy that, and add that here. Now we got access to the stored restaurants. And now that will be an array where only one restaurant has that ID. So now we want to look at all the restaurants, and once we found the one restaurant with that ID, we don't want to continue looking at the others, but instead then we want to return our response with that restaurant data. And to do this, we can again use a good old for loop, what we did before in this course as well, because we want to look at all restaurants and find one specific restaurant. And whenever you want to do something on all the items in an array, a for loop isn't a bad choice. So here I'll again then go through all my restaurants in this stored restaurants array with a for of loop, as you learned it. And then in this for of loop, I want to have an if statement, which is executed for every restaurant, therefore, where I compare the restaurant ID, so of the restaurant we are currently looking at in this loop, with the restaurant ID I got in my URL, so the restaurant ID I got in my path here. So I'll compare this restaurant ID like this. And if I do that, then I know that if I make it into this if statement, so if this condition is met, then I found the correct restaurant, otherwise I haven't. Now, once I did find the correct restaurant, I wanna render my response. I wanna render the restaurant detail template and finish. Now, since I wanna finish at this point, I will return here, because we did learn that the return keyword does return a value to the place where a function was executed, which is not too important for us here because we are not executing this function on our own. Express does that for us instead. But return also finishes this function execution. So when this return statement here kicks in, this loop execution will finish and the overall function execution will finish. And that's what I want. I don't want to look at the other restaurants as well if I already found the restaurant I'm interested in. That's why I add return here, so that I stop the function execution. Not primarily because I want to return a value, but simply because return also stops function execution. And then to this restaurant detail template, I want to pass this restaurant, which we last looked at, because that is the restaurant that has all the data which I want to show on this detail page. So then here in this object, which we pass to render, I'll pass in a restaurant key, because in restaurant detail EJS, I am referring to that restaurant key here. If you chose a different name here, then you also want to pass a different name here. But here I did use restaurant, so I'll stick to it. And on the right side, I also have restaurant. Now again, this can be confusing, but this restaurant here is this constant restaurant. So it's different for every loop iteration. And the concrete restaurant I'm passing in here is the restaurant which we identified, so which made it through this check here. So it's the restaurant where the ID matches the restaurant ID here, which we have in our URL. This restaurant here, on the other hand, on the left side of this colon, that, as I just explained, is simply restaurant because I chose the key restaurant in the template. If I would have chosen a different name here, then we also would have chosen a different key here. So I'm just repeating this because it is important that this is not confusing, but pretty clear instead. Now, I'll auto-format this code, and with that we're passing restaurant data into the template. So now in the template, besides outputting the name, we can also output all the other data and output the restaurant cuisine here, and the restaurant address here, and then here also the description with restaurant.description. And all these keys which I'm using here, of course, are the value keys which you find here in this JSON document. So that's what you find here, and that's what I'm accessing in restaurant detail EJS. And therefore here, as a value for the ref attribute, I also want to have restaurant.website. Now with that, if you again save all the files, you should be able to reload this page and find the concrete restaurant data. And that should then work for all the restaurants. So if you access different restaurants, you now see different data here. You see the detailed data for that restaurant. And now the advantage to this overall list which we have here is that you can now view the details of a restaurant on a standalone page, and that you then could grab that link here, if this would be running on a real server exposed to the World Wide Web, which is not the case yet, but which we can do later in the course, then you could grab that link and share it with other people to point them at one specific restaurant. And this is possible because of this dynamic route feature which we added, combined with a unique identification criteria, in this case, this restaurant ID, which we are also generating dynamically whenever a new restaurant gets posted, gets added.